Hi, I'm Marguerite Manning, karmic astrologer and 12th house locksmith. If you've landed here on your YouTube search, I can only assume that, like me, you're fascinated by something or everything the 12th house in your birth chart represents. You should be. As the soul's exclusive doorway into this and every earthly existence, the 12th house does more than just document the universal conditions in which your spirit entered this physical world. It actually exposes the wake of karmic debris that followed you in. Think of it. The cosmic contrails of your unconscious past right there in the 12th house of your birth chart. Who knew? And that's the point. Listen to my 12th house interviews here on YouTube and learn more about the house of your karmic yesterday and what you can do yourself to unlock it today.
Welcome, I'm Debra Ann Clement, and thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Shortcut to the Soul. So today I'm very excited to welcome my first guest in this podcast series, and it is karmic astrologer Marguerite Manning. Marguerite is Llewellyn Worldwide's best-selling author of Cosmic Karma, Understanding Your Soul's Contract with the Universe, as well as Sign Language, Decoding Your Contract with the Universe, and Juno, Your Karmic Match Made in Heaven, which is actually volume 1 in a series of e-booklets about making cosmic sense of the asteroids. And you can get them all on Amazon. They're all available. She's also been an editorial contributor to Dell Horoscope, to the Mountain Astrologer, and I could go on, but then we'd run out of time for the show. So instead, Marguerite, I'm just going to welcome you. I'm so happy to have you today on the show.
Thank you, Deborah. It's so good to be back on a radio podcast with you, my favorite podcaster, my favorite radio host. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Actually, Marguerite was my first guest on Anchored in Astrology. And the truth is there were a few guests really before you, but they were people that I knew, quite frankly. They were friends. So you were the first legitimate guest who said, I don't know who she is or, but I'm going to give it a shot, and came on the show. And that's, it's about 10 years ago now. So
absolutely. And that's when we first met. So that was really a very, very nice encounter. And I'm really glad that you shot an email to me and invited me on. It was the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
I like to think it was karmic.
I do too, Deb.
So today I want to talk about your specialty. And I want to talk about the eighth house. Goodness, I'm an eighth house gal myself, but we're here to talk about your specialty and not my specialty. We're here to talk about the 12th house. And it's by far, it's one of the most mysterious houses. And I'll be honest, 12th house for me is not the easiest house to work with, with that energy. Right. And so I do view it when I work with it as the house of service, sacrifice, and salvation. But I know you're the expert. So let's talk about that 12th house and also unlocking. All right. Let's talk about unlocking the 12th house. And because you have a course out, it's a workbook, right?
I do, and it's called Unlocking Your 12th House, Your Karmic Closet. And I think that's one of the reasons you and I work so well together. You're such an expert, and you have such a passion for looking into the future. And my passion and purpose in astrology has always been finding the soul's past in the birth energies, and that was the 12th house, because I've always been a firm believer that in order to move on with what our destiny was in this lifetime, we have to force the soul in us to let go of the past. And I believe in addressing the past, like most psychotherapists today say, you can't fix what you don't acknowledge. But I'm convinced that's why it gets such a bum rap, the house of secret sorrows and self-undoing, because it's what the soul has, coming into this lifetime, what the soul has chosen to keep under lock and key, the improper programming from our previous lives that actually get in the way of this one. And until it's consciously addressed, it does turn into our undoing in this lifetime, as I'm sure you've seen many times in the birth chart.
Well, I have to say the 12th house, it does have that reputation. I always say for the addicted, the afflicted, right, the restricted. But as I always say, you have to remember who else lives in the 12th house. And you have your artists, your healers, your visionaries, your intuitives. So a lot of it, when I'm working with the 12th house and I say, these are the opportunities, a lot of it is the choice. How are you going to help this help this energy to express it. But the 12th house, because it is connected to the soul's past, it is a house of the subconscious. So it's not that easy to access that information for I'm going to say for the mere mortals like us. But you have a way to do that. And I know in this workbook, people can actually do it themselves. But let's talk about the 12th house. And I would like you to, one question to tell everyone, because we're all drawn to different things. What was it about the 12th house that just, ignited this passion in you?
Well, I like you, I was an astrologer for a long time. And it was when I moved from up north, the New York, New Jersey area, and I came into the Washington, D.C. area. And for the first time, I was very close to the ARE, Edgar Cayce's Association of Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. We took a trip down there, and I read through many of his readings and his writings, and I was astounded how often he talked about astrology in his readings. He was referring in 1930 to a planet in the sky as Septius, the seventh planet from Earth, which later on in 1930, when it was discovered, they started calling Pluto in his readings. So he was aware of things in the universe before people in the scientific and astronomical field were even aware of things. But what he mentioned was how this was a very physical lifetime. The soul came here for a physical life to succeed in the physical world, and that meant in this physical lifetime, a life that the body had worked for, but the soul could be proud of. So you and I both have talked about this many times. It's not about giving everything up in this lifetime and proving that we're martyrs. And it's not about being so successful that we pay no attention to anyone else and don't try to help anybody else with compassion. It's about the balance of the two. And when I read his I always say, Carl Sagan gave me a love of the stars above, and he gave me a love for the spirit within. And he combined the two for me. And what he said that was so fascinating in his readings, Deb, he said that when the soul comes into this lifetime, each lifetime it comes in, it's like another class, another lifetime where it's learning something. The portal, the physical portal that it comes in is 30 degrees above the eastern horizon as seen from the birthplace. And we both know as astrologers that's the coordinates of the 12th house, everyone's 12th house. So no wonder they call it the soul's home. I think we were taught, maybe we're walking in our own astrological footprints, but I think we were taught astrology by some kind of higher life form, or the ancients knew what was really going on. And when you look into the 12th house and you start to astrologically, get an in-depth analysis of the constellation, the ruler, the aspects being made to that ruler, you can actually see the karmic debris field. You can see what the soul, the cosmic contrails of what the soul brought in yesterday. No wonder it's referred to now as that, for me, as the house of secret sorrows and self-undoing, because the soul is keeping that stuff under lock and key. And we have to consciously address it in this lifetime to purge it from that karmic closet so that we can get on. Because many times it's kind of like the boogeyman under the bed when we're little, until our parents come in and shine a light under the bed and show us there's nothing really there. Those are the things that are holding us and locking us down in fear. It's this improper programming. The soul's tugging on our sleeve saying, you don't want to go there. Remember what happened the last time. You don't want to meet him. You remember what happened the last time. Or if we actually saw those monsters in the 12th house, they wouldn't be monsters after all. And that's what I love. I love going in there and the reaction I get from the very beginning from people that I don't know, I never knew, and where these things resonate with them on such an emotional level, which that's when you're making connection to the soul, when it's so emotional and it's so inherent and it's so innate. And many times it changes things it changes the perspective. It's almost like, the first time I bought my first Volkswagen, my first car, it was this blue turquoise Volkswagen. I thought, I'm the only one in the world with this car. And then all of a sudden you're seeing them all over the road, right? And you're saying, because for the first time in my life, it was in my conscious awareness. And the minute we put something into our conscious awareness, then we start seeing patterns and cycles. And there's only one way to break a pattern or a cycle, and that's consciously.
And I do want to make a comment here just for the listeners, because for years when we both had time, Marguerite and I did a joint reading together called The Ever-Present Past. And that emotional connection, because I do want to say that with clients, that past, that resonating, that would resonate with them. And it was very often very, very emotional for the people. And they don't always know why. I remember people saying, exactly. They felt it was that feeling. And from that feeling, of course, then came the awareness. So here's my question for you. I'm going to say the average listener, and they're not really that familiar, about the 12th house, and certainly the intricacies of the 12th house, the rules and such. But what is, and I know there's a great benefit, but let's say in a nutshell, that's how I'm going to put it. In a nutshell, a benefit or an awakening or just something connected to the 12th house. I mean, every house has a sign. So there are 12 signs, and you can have a different, right? So one of the 12 signs could be on the 12th house. And I know the sign on that 12th house does have some meaning. And so, I'm going to say, if you can, sort of like in a nutshell, if someone says, well, I have Aries on my 12th house and through, what would that tell you? I'm going to say right off the bat.
Well, the thing is that what I'm presenting are the 6 keys. The sign on the 12th house is the first key. And what that tells me about is the potential and the promise of that last lifetime. The potential and promise that was lost in that lifetime, and the event or the issue that created an emotionally crippling event for the soul that promise and potential was never met. And for instance, if you have Aries on the 12th house, and it's more in depth to this, but right off the bat, what that tells me, and the ruler of the 12th house, of course, is Mars, where that is in the chart, the sign that it's in, the closest hard aspect. This I go through each key in the workbook. But for instance, with Aries on the 12th house, there's no doubt about it. That's a backstory of lost glory. They were a highly capable and a heroic individual, and that really was destined for great triumph or extraordinary achievement, and something debilitating happened to them. If there's Taurus on the 12th, it's a backstory of lost self-worth. Okay. If there's Gemini on the 12th, it's a backstory of a lost voice, where they were either verbally or mentally abused, and they weren't allowed to speak. They weren't allowed to communicate or to network. Now, that could mean that somebody was misdiagnosed with a learning disability, or it could also mean that somebody was verbally abused. But this is what Gemini on the 12th means. Cancer on the 12th, no doubt about it, lost family. Whether you had to give up a child for adoption, or you were separated from your parents, or you were sent out of the country as a child because of war, lost family. Leo on the 12th, it's a backstory always of lost stardom. You were supposed to be somebody in a previous life. What happened? What was the event that kept you from being that powerful somebody? Virgo on the 12th, lost competence. You were really gifted and technically skilled, and something happened to make you feel you're destined for a distinguished public service, an honored selfless duty, and something happened that you took on as happening on your watch, that the guilt and the shame kept you from ever pursuing that technicality or that field again. If there's Libra on the 12th, it's lost self-esteem, and it's usually due to a romantic partner or a business partner that was abusive or manipulative and kept you from using your gifts in that lifetime. If Scorpio's on the 12th, lost control. You were a very alone and unlikely survivor in that lifetime who was counting on support and resources, whether you were in the military and you were counting on the planes coming in to back you up, or whether you were a widow who expected your husband to leave you a great legacy. Your resources were taken from you. You had no resources, and because nobody counted on you living or surviving, and you did. Sagittarius on the 12th, it's a backstory of lost convictions. You were kept from telling your truth, speaking your philosophy, and probably imprisoned because of it in some capacity. Capricorn on the 12th, you're back, and that's usually scientific and ahead of with Sagittarius on the 12th, scientific and ahead of the now knowledge. Backstory, Capricorn, it's lost status. Your life held the promise of great material success or kind of like worldly accomplishment, but your soul was somebody in your family, particularly your father, an authority figure. There was some kind of a scandal or misuse of public office that forced you into hiding, that forced you to hide from the public, that kept you under the radar that entire life just to survive. Aquarius on the 12th, it's a lost genius, no doubt about it. Many people with Aquarius on the 12th in the last lifetime were psychic or had mental capabilities like transcendental meditation, and they were hospitalized because they were considered having actually a mental impairment. They were an idealistic visionary, and their life held the promise of really scientific trailblazing or exceptional humanitarianism, until something that they invented was used in a way that harmed others or made them look bad. Pisces on the 12th, lost faith. This was the martyr in the last lifetime. This was somebody that really went out of their way to be there for other people, a compassionate and gifted healer whose life in that lifetime held the promise of really kind of like miraculous rehabilitations or extraordinary emotional service. And the very people they were trying to help, either they died or they were hurt, and they took that on, and they were self-inflicted victimization in that lifetime because they couldn't deal with what happened when they were trying to help people or they were trying to do their best to be compassionate in that lifetime. So this is just like in a nutshell what each sign. But then the ruler.
Oh, wait, I'm going to ask you to hold on 1 second. Sure. Because I wanted to comment on this and just say that sign on the 12th house. And because I want to talk about your workbook, because it's unlocking your 12th house workbook. And it's also really, it's a course. It's really a workbook course. And I do want to mention this because, first of all, it's only available from your website, right? MargueriteManning.com. And there are 6 keys. And so that first key, which is the sign on the 12th house, and yes, that was I'm going to attest to that, folks. That was just, like a glimpse, a nutshell of the sign on the house. And I want you to discuss the other keys. But I also want to just sort of assure everyone, it's not, when I say it's not that complicated, because sometimes when someone's listening, they could be thinking, God, where am I going to get that information if I don't know, what is my ruler? And so I do want to say, if you don't have a horoscope, your own, a copy of your horoscope chart, you can find them online. You can find it right on my website at DebraClementAstrologer.com. So if you need the chart and to know where everything is and what sign is on your 12th house, you can certainly get it there. But there are these 6 keys, and I want to say, because I have the workbook, I've looked at the workbook, it is very step by step, and I just really want to stress that. It's very well organized. And so the first key, of course, is a person who's going to be working with a sign on their 12th house. But the second key you're going to, and that's going to be about the 12th house ruler. And so what does that tell them?
Well, as you mentioned, I purposely, it's a course that has 3 different parts to it, and there's a very user-friendly chart tools guide where it helps you recognize any sign, any ruler, tells you where to go to look for each key in your chart. And after each key, you fill out a worksheet. And then at the very end of the book, you put all your keys together, and you kind of get a narrative of the last life, and then you get steps how to purge your karmic closet of these things that are holding you back. The second key is your 12th house ruler, and you can find that in the workbook and the chart tools guys. You learn how to find the ruler of that sign that's on your 12th house, what to look for, where to find it, and that key, that will be the luminary or the planet or the asteroid that rules that sign that is positioned on your 12th house cusp. What that does, it unlocks who you actually were in that last lifetime. That ruler unlocks who you were in that life that you just got a thumbnail description of what's the promise and potential and where your place in that life.
And I do want to just mention one thing for the people who are listening who are new to astrology. A luminary, we're talking about the sun and the moon.
Correct.
And for the asteroids, because people may think, wait, an asteroid, ruling a house. So let's talk about that, because that's very interesting about the asteroid that you consider in terms of being a house ruler.
Okay. The asteroid that I consider for karmic purposes it rules Virgo. And it's the opposite sign of Neptune. I always say that, Virgo is the healer, but the physical healer, where Neptune is the emotional and the psychological healer. And Virgo, for me, rules the sign of, Chiron rules the sign of Virgo. And you have the chart tools guys, you show how to recognize Chiron, where to find it in the chart if you have Virgo on the 12th. But I also bring Mercury in as a co-ruler to Virgo, but primarily Virgo is the ruler for me for karmic purposes Chiron is the ruler for me for Virgo for karmic purposes.
So that's why it's a little, it's when I say it's a little bit different, and and I'm going to tell you, it makes perfect karmic sense. It certainly does. So just wanted to clarify that for okay. So what's the third key? Let's talk about the third key.
Well, the ruler, the actual ruler, that because that identifies where you were in that last life, and the thing that you had to hide about yourself due to the personal guilt or shame, the sign that ruler is in, not the sign on your 12th, and I show you how to depict the difference between the two in the workbook, but the sign that the ruler is in is quite often very different than the sign that's on your 12th house.
So I'm going to give an example and just say, for example, Aries is on my 12th house. Correct. The planet that rules Aries, hey, it's Mars. But my Mars, I'm looking for my Mars sign, and my Mars is in Sagittarius.
Correct.
So that's a 3-step process.
That's the sign of your 12th house. That's your 12th house ruler sign. Okay. And that the sign unlocks your secret personal sorrow from yesterday. In other words, the who you dreamed of coming back in that lifetime, but due to that fall from grace, never got around to being. And what's really interesting about Sagittarius, that is somebody who's on a soapbox, preaching, getting the word out, a radio show host. Hello. That's what you dreamed of being in that lifetime. A professor, an educator, an enlightener in that last lifetime. And that's what the sign that the ruler is in. The ruler itself, and you'll see a list in the workbook, and it will tell you what that ruler means, who you were, but the sign tells you who you dreamed of being in that lifetime.
And the point really that I just want to make for listeners, it's really not that complicated. When you actually sit down to do it, it's step by step, and it is really clear. You do actually, I'm going to say, sort of hold their hand, throughout the book.
Which is fine because, it like I say, I don't expect people to do this workbook when they're making dinner or watching the news. This is something that you sit down, because on each chapter, every time you go to one of the chapters and you read one of the keys and you depict the key in your own workbook, then there's a part where your soul weighs in on that particular key, and adds to the story. Without censoring yourself, you're asked to bring something else in on a very meditative soul level. And you'd be surprised when you start working with your own birth chart, and you start touching on little touch points of things that the floodgates start to open. And I asked you to write down everything. And this workbook is not only user-friendly, but it's typable, so you can use it on any device. You can use it on your computer, on your cell phone, on your iPad, so you can type right on the workbook itself from your device. And
it is a workbook. I do want to say this. It's not something that you want to sit down and rush through it. It really is something to take the time to absorb the information. And, you'll say meditate on it. Maybe some people would want to journal about it. But it is because it helps. I have to say it's about getting in touch. It's with your soul. It's getting in touch with people will call it the higher self. But to me, it's about getting in touch with the soul. And so what is the next key?
The key 4 is your 12th house rules. Now, we just looked at your 12th house rule, and then I asked you to go into your chart and find out what sign that ruler was in, and then you told me the sign, and you write that down in your book, and that key explains other things to you about your past. And the next part is, what house is that ruler? And we know the sign. Now we need to know the house, because in the workbook, this house will reveal to you how your soul was really crippled by the loss identified in key 1. In key 1, you're told you have a loss, but this is telling you, based on the house, how you were irrevocably wounded and the areas of life that were most affected in that crippling aftermath. And the things that in this lifetime still can be very hurtful to you, or still feel like an open wound. And it's those areas of life in that particular house. So that's what key 4 identifies for you. What areas of life for unconsciously do you feel automatically? Is it the 10th house? Do you feel like you were never recognized by your father, or the outside world never paid you attention? You're always trying to measure up to those people. Where were you irrevocably wounded in that by key 1 in your last lifetime?
And I want to point something out, because this is very common, that when you get to key 4 and it's like there's that, let's say, that aha moment, and you say, oh, this is what it's showing me. Usually you recognize it, and very often, at least it's been my experience, certainly, because, from way back, Marguerite, I had a full reading of my chart, and of course the work that we've done together with the other clients, and I've heard their reactions, and this is saying, this is familiar in this lifetime. It may not be the same exact circumstances, but there's usually sort of a common theme that it absolutely resonates.
Because you know what, Deborah, we're in such unconscious cycles and habit patterns that until we address them and make a conscious effort to stop them, our soul just goes on that path. It just goes on that path. So if it's like if it's your 10th house, then you're always going to have issues with authority figure. If it's your 7th house, you're always going to be attracting the people that bring that up in you, so that you're forced to deal with it in this lifetime. But it's nice to know that. Kind of lets us off the hook a little bit, saying, hey, I'm not crazy. I just have to go to class.
Well, that's what I will say sometimes to clients as well, because it's true, and it's in the birth chart. Your soul came here to learn this lesson. And again, when we're trying to become, let's say, an expert at something, well, it's not your fault that you're not an expert, because you have to practice to get there. So yes, I agree with you. It does sort of let you off the hook a little bit, give you a little bit of a pass.
Exactly. So you can say, that was me yesterday, not me today.
So what I find interesting is with key number 5, because key number 5, I believe that is the 12th house rulers. That has to do with the most difficult aspect in the chart, right?
Correct. And I show people how to find the closest hard aspect, the hard aspects being the conjunction, the opposition, and the square, and how you can determine. You don't have to be, a rocket science or even an astrologer to determine which one is the closest, which one is causing the most pain to that ruler. And that's when you follow in the birth chart how easy that is to do by the numbers next to the aspect in your chart to determine which one of those hard aspects. And here's a little secret that's not even in the workbook, and it's just for your listeners. The closest hard aspect, as you see in Key 5, it identifies the single most contributing factor to yesterday's unhappiness. What caused your unhappiness? What was your undoing, in the sense that if it's Mars, and it might have been some man that was provoking you in the last lifetime. If it's Venus, it could have been a love affair that did you in. If it's Mercury, it could have been a sibling. That's the hardest aspect. But the closest soft aspect, which would be a trine, which would be a sextile, that's also the gift in your last lifetime that was never used, that you never brought to fruition, that's still simmering below the surface in this lifetime, that has yet to make you, it has yet to impress others the way it should have in your last lifetime.
That is interesting. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. I think you held out on me with that one.
but that's what, so the aspect of when people say, oh, I have nothing in my 12th house. I mean, we've already gotten through 5 keys without even mentioning planets in the 12th. Planets in the 12th is the last key. That's key 6. And what they are they are what the soul is holding hostage in this lifetime. What was held hostage, pretty much locked up in some capacity in your last life, and you've promised in this lifetime you would unleash.
And it includes not just the planets, but also the asteroids.
Correct.
So which asteroids in particular, because there are so many of them out there really, but the asteroids that we're talking about?
We're talking about for my karmic purposes, and not to, and the ones that I use in karmic astrology are the 4 main asteroids. Aside from Chiron, there's Pallas, Juno, Ceres, and Vesta, as well as Chiron. So there's Chiron, Pallas, Juno, Ceres, and Vesta, the 4 main asteroids in Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer. Pallas is the warrior queen. She represents male domination. Chiron, of course, physical health. Juno is the divine consort. She represents a wife or a woman's role in marriage or any kind of partnership in general. Ceres is the great mother, where the moon in astrology represents the mother-child relationship. Ceres represents the mother and the adult-child relationship, mothering adult children or a separation from our parents as they get older. Vesta is the eternal flame. It's the cultural vows, the spiritual truths that our soul grew up with in particular, or had to sacrifice in a last lifetime. So those are the 4 main asteroids and Chiron that I use.
And again, if you do not know what the symbols or glyphs are for the planets and the asteroids, it's in the workbook.
It's all in the workbook, yes.
And so when you're talking about the planets in your 12th house, and of course it's going to depend on the planet, but an example, I just want to, if you'd give an example of how one of the planets plays out as being connected to your soul in this lifetime. One particular planet, let's say, what it might unlock, and what it's committed, to dealing with in this one.
Okay, so in you mean if there's planets in the 12th house?
If there are planets, and I'm just going to ask you, let's say the sun. Let's just use the sun as an example.
Okay. The planets in the 12th house, now again, not everyone has a planet or a luminary, right, in the 12th house, but like I said, these are karmic hostages. And it's really a very important piece to the story. It's the one that reflects the things that were, think of the 12th house, so cruelly taken from you or even emotionally used against you in that lifeline that they're now imprisoned. Your soul is afraid to let them out, but your soul promised in this lifetime you would. So just say the sun is in the 12th. That is a clear indication that in some way you or your vital spirit was held hostage yesterday. You were either oppressed or imprisoned or kidnapped. In some way you were physically and emotionally held hostage in your last lifetime if the sun is. And that's why a lot of people with the sun in the 12th are psychic in nature and are in touch with the other side of the spirit. They spend so much time in that emotional realm of being by themselves, alone, and in victimhood in that last lifetime, that they got in touch with the spiritual. It was the only path they had out was the spiritual path. So that's why many people with the sun in the 12th are psychic. They work very incredibly. And, we talk about artists and creative people, but that's getting in touch with that underlying soul part of you on a divine level when you're that kind of an artist or that kind of a creator. With the moon in the 12th, it's your family, or your many times people with the moon in the 12th, their mother was taken from them, or their family was taken from them, because their emotional instincts and their nurturing were held hostage yesterday. They were victimized in the past by being unjustly separated from parents in particular.
See, the sun, and the reason I asked about the sun is because whenever I look at a chart and I have a 12th house sun, I know immediately there are gifts. This is a gifted person.
Absolutely.
And the thing about the sun, and it might be an intuitive gift, it could be, a creative gift, but it's behind that curtain. And it is,
right.
To me, Neptune, and, this, anyone who's followed me for years know I'm not a big fan of Neptune, but I'm ruled by Saturn, so, Neptune, it's vague.
Well, after this year, I'm right up there with you, sis. So, trust me.
But the point about the sun being in that 12th house is that I always say eventually, his bottom line is this: no matter where the sun is, it is meant to shine, and eventually that sun is going to burn through that fog. It may take some time, and that's why I get a lot of questions about the sun in the 12th house. And so I think the workbook, no matter what your chart is like is wonderful. If you have a 12th house sun, I really feel like you need this workbook.
Well, the thing about the sun, too, which you say, what I always notice, and it's funny how with the different perspectives, mine is the past. Whenever the sun is in the 12th, think of it. They weren't allowed out. They have these gifts that they fine-tuned. They were alone with them. But there's always profound loneliness and an unconscious fear of the spotlight. These are the people that are afraid to put themselves out there because of what happened in their last lifetime, because they were so blocked up and so held hostage. Anytime I've seen somebody with a sun in the 12th house, I always have to remind them it's about the work they're depriving other people. Don't worry about you. It's their ego is the last thing that they want to put out there. They don't want the fame. They don't want the celebrity. So you have to make it about their work.
Well, that's something else, because first of all, the 12th house, Neptune rules the 12th house. Neptune is an ego-denying planet,
exactly.
Right, to begin with. And I've always said that, to me, the 12th house sun, because where does the satisfaction come? Where does the fulfillment come? And even though it's the sun, it doesn't come through the ego. It actually, to me, it comes through the soul.
Right.
In that 12th house. But I have to say, the Unlocking Your 12th House workbook, I recommend it. So I am just going to say visit Marguerite's website, and it's margueritemanning.com, and you could read some great articles there as well that she has posted. And so let me just ask you, when I say what else, but in terms of the Unlocking Your 12th House, if you had the most important thing, and I know it's really hard to do because there's several things that come from it, but in terms of the gift of it, and that's what I want to talk about, because the 12th house does have the reputation, right? It's sorrow, it's self-sabotage, but it's definitely about the gift. And I'm going to say it's about Chiron. I'm just going to sort of go off topic here a second.
Okay.
And that's what I often say about Chiron when I work with Chiron in the chart. Yes, Chiron was the wounded healer. And, and it's sad and it's terrible, right? And he could heal everyone else, let's say, but himself. And I always say, yes, he was wounded, but he was able to heal everyone else. And besides, Of course, he was a teacher, but that's the gift. And so that's why working with the 12th house and focusing more on the gift, because, every 12th house, certainly, of course, it has its issues, but it has its gift.
And it's always the sign on the 12th house will tell you the gifts that are being suppressed in this lifetime because of what happened in the last, like Aries on the 12th. This is somebody that could actually work for the CIA or the FBI. These people, because think of it, in their last lifetime, they were so forced to work behind the scenes and they lost their glory. They couldn't put themselves out there anymore. They know how to work behind the scenes. They know how to get information on anybody about anything if they can. And they're really, really good at they're physically competent, but they're all, and that's the Aries, but they're also very independent and much more ambitious than anybody gives them credit for. They can really, if they have it in their mind to make something happen, my money's on an Aries on the 12th. They can do it. Really. But that's the gift. Think of this, every sign that's on there, that is the gift, that it's really being suppressed because they were forced to keep it under lock and key in their last lifetime.
And looking at the 12th house, as I'm going to say, the house of the subconscious, there can be maybe you're drawn to something, you could be attracted to something, you may not really quite know why, right. But because really, of course, it's connected to the soul. And that's that's what your work really is all about. It's really working with the soul.
And when you're all finished coming up with the narrative, the thumbnail description of your last lifetime, then what the workbook takes you on is steps and exercises to purge them out of your karmic closet, and the things you can do now in this lifetime to move beyond those things that were paralyzing you in the past. How to consciously break the unconscious cycles of yesterday. And that's the point of the workbook, to not just say, oh, isn't that really neat that I used to be a warrior in a last lifetime, but what can you do now to move beyond what that feeling of guilt and shame left in you in the last lifetime, that you was improper. It was an improper programming that your soul brought back into this lifetime. And the really cool thing about programming is we can reprogram ourselves. And that's the nice thing that's exactly what I hope to help everybody do, is to eliminate the improper program and put a new narrative, put a new loop in there in the conscious mind.
Because one part I'm just going to say, sort of like going to a doctor, you get a diagnosis, this is what the issue is, but then it's like, fine, where do I go from there? And so right. I will say with workbook and what you're talking about in the various end steps, and of course, quite frankly, it takes some, give some thinking, give some consideration, take some actions, right?
Right.
But because we do have to take some action. But it's actually, I do want to say, besides I'm going to call it the diagnostic part of the 12th house, but I'm going to use the word coaching in a way, to be honest with you, that I just feel is that if I'm working through this, once I've gotten these issues, there are the steps here to help me, to lead me, to point me in the direction, and to give me some guidance and help me sort of be a little bit of a cheerleader for me to keep going forward and working on these issues.
And this is what I did and this is one of the things that, how you and I both know this, and we're doing a private session or a private reading. Sometimes it's like 3 hours of analytical, in-depth work before you even get a client or a customer on the phone. So my feeling was these are just the first 6 basic steps that I use. And of course, it doesn't go into the weeds and a lot of other things that might be overwhelming to people. But these are the first 6 steps in coming to that point where you feel like you're starting to open that door and you're ready to see what it is that is gotten in your way before. Some people might not want a whole in-depth analysis of their soul's past. They just might want to know what's the improper programming that's keeping them from living up to what they want to do today.
And I am going to add one more thing, the section which you call it chart tools. And that is certainly where Marguerite describes, the houses, the planets, and the signs, and you have everything that you've been talking about. It's almost like, quite frankly, in and of itself, it's a little lesson in astrology.
And it's something you can keep with you no matter what astrology book you're reading to find your way around the birth chart. Because I know it can be very overwhelming when you see all the houses and planets and signs. Oh my, you don't know where to start if you really don't know much about astrology. It can be, like another language to you. But this makes it very easy, right? This makes it very easy to depict what you're looking for in the chart, these 6 basic keys that you're looking for to unlocking what your soul has been keeping under lock and key for eons, And
that's why I want to stress how well organized it is. And that's why I say you can do it in steps, take your time with it. Now, I do want to say also, because to me, it's a bargain, and I'm just going to say that the price is an absolute bargain. And if you purchase it, of course, you have to purchase it to find out, but there is a special offer at the end for workbookers only. So I'm just going to throw that out there,
And that's right. Thanks for mentioning that, Deb, because I feel that if anybody needs a little extra help finding their way around putting the past life pieces of their backstory together, connecting the dots, it's a very, very low cost 20-minute session to get a little help in doing that. And that's only for people. All you have to do is have purchased a workbook and
done the work.
Yep, done the work, right.
Yeah, do the work. And so, again, I recommend it, and I'm so happy to have you on the show.
I'm so happy you're back on the air. We missed you.
Felt like, feels like old times, right?
It sure does. Thank you so much, Debra.
So until, let's see, anything else? Any last words? Anything you want to promote? I'm just trying to remember your Twitter handle, for example.
Stargazer M on Twitter and Cosmic Karma on Facebook.
All right, so you can find Marguerite there and keep up with her there and whatever new developments that she has. So Marguerite, again, thank you so much. And to everyone, thank you again for joining me for this week's episode. And until next time, may Jupiter's blessings be your constant companion.